His land was green and good.
Over the Edge is one of the first real story games ever published, and while not a fantastically huge seller, has been tremendously influential. It was published in 1992 and written by Jonathan Tweet, who has continued to be a fairly important figure in gaming. Now, this was a game that really was styled after playing surreal games of a Burroughs or Cronenbergian nature in many ways, though perhaps with slightly less body horror than Cronenberg. It takes place on an island called Alamaja, which is a sort of Mediterranean island out in the middle of nowhere with its own despotic government, separate from the rest of the world, but also a site with its own strange culture and where all kinds of weird things tend to happen. As you can see from the layout and so on, it's a very 90s style. What made it particularly interesting was the way in which you could play just about anything, and in the way that it departed from traditional statistics and ways of defining a character by skill and so forth, by instead giving you traits and flaws, and these would more broadly describe your character. So you might describe your character primarily as a soldier, and that would be their most defining characteristic and would have the most dice. Then you would have a few other traits to describe them. Could be anything: divorcee, psychic, colony of ants. You could really choose just about anything, and any special abilities were lower in the number of dice that you could have. It also massively discouraged combat in the usual way that it occurred in games. Guns and so on were restricted to the government on this island, so tasers, martial arts, these sorts of things, these were far more the things that your characters had access to. So it actively discouraged gunplay via the setting in a more successful way than SLA Industries did, simply by making bullets more expensive. You simply didn't have access to guns, and if you did get hold of guns, you were in deep, deep trouble. The system's interesting in and of its own way, and it's very simple to adapt to other kinds of games. It's also available under a license now, and openly, so if you want to check out the system, you can. Just go looking for it. But what really set this game apart, besides the system, was the setting. Alamaja is absolutely packed to the rafters with information. Drugs, people, which were easy to define because the system was so simple, and everything has something interesting about it. Every building, every shop, every district, every person is tangled into Alamaja's conspiracies, issues, problems, and so on in some way. There is always a hook somewhere, something for you to get drawn into, no matter what. So it was a very easy game to just run off the cuff. Make up these strange band of characters, set them going, let them encounter whatever they happened to encounter while they were out, and let the game grow organically. And because the system was so simple, it was incredibly easy for a games master to just improvise. And because there was stuff everywhere, every stone you turned over, there was a conspiracy or issue of one kind or another, you could just kind of meander and ramble and let weird things happen and encounters and so on grow organically. The idea of creating such a place, such a setting that's just absolutely jammed with ideas is one that I've certainly taken on myself in my work. In Forever Summer, for example, the town of Ocean's View has similarly, stuff everywhere, all kinds of weirdness, strangeness, ideas, adventure hooks, wherever you look. And this seems to be a model that other games have followed with their setting books. The idea of plot hooks, rather than necessarily setting out complete adventures, is one that I've certainly brought into my own work, and which I've seen more and more in other people's work. But Over the Edge still stands out as an early example of this. That aspect has been taken on in more mainstream game books, supplements, setting books and so forth, whereas the story gaming idea has kind of taken off and become its own thing, its own movement, separate and distinct, just as the old school Renaissance has become its own separate and distinct part of the gaming industry. And sat in the middle you have what passes for mainstream RPGs, which tend to now incorporate aspects of both. Even D&D in 5th edition now has these kind of story gaming elements. The backgrounds and other defining characteristics besides your statistics may give you advantage or disadvantage in certain areas. And that just goes to show how far, even in the most traditional and old-fashioned of RPGs, that these story elements have come in. Speaking for myself, I am neither on the traditional end nor the story end of gaming. I like aspects of both. Sometimes crunch helps. It really depends on the kind of game that you're creating. I think setting matters and system matters. And when the two are working together in synergy, that's when you tend to get the best games. Feng Shui being a great example. But Over the Edge is another definitive example, I think, where the system and the setting and the kind of idealized style of play all work together. It's a game that deserves more attention than it's gotten. I believe it had a more recent edition, this being the original edition here. But if you can get hold of a copy, or you just want to check out the system, which you can get for free, then I highly recommend it, because it's good to know where a lot of these ideas come from, and to understand them in the context of gaming as a whole.